Hello, my friends. Welcome. We are this week looking at the personal essay and the absolutely fantastic Joseph Brodsky. You will find on the Moodle an extract from his work Watermark. It's from the very beginning of the work. It's quite a long essay. So I mean it's an essay, but it's a book in itself. This is the beautiful book. So I've just given you the beginning of it. Have a read through that before this session. I think you're going to enjoy it. It's one of my favorite works of literature ever. It's a bit weird, I think, when you start reading it. You sort of go, what am I looking at here? And I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about the personal essay is that it kind of defies definition in a lot of way. That being said, that is obviously what we are going to try and do, is work out what the heck is this genre? How does it work? So Watermark is going to be our kind of key reading for this. This is what we're going to be discussing. Make sure you've read this. I'm probably going to put up a couple of little extracts as well from some other things if you want to read around a little bit and find some other essays to delight and fascinate you. Let's begin with this this genre. Like, what is it? One of the things we're going to be discussing when we meet next Monday is we're going to talk about different forms of creative nonfiction and where they come from, how they connect, where they overlap, what the similarities are, what the differences are, and where the personal essay sits in with all of that. I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a head start today on kind of thinking about that, but I want you to just sort of think, what do you think a personal essay is? Where do you think it will exist physically in the world, or digitally, as one might find it? What are you expecting of this genre? Have a little think about that. We'll discuss it when we start on Monday. The history. I'm going to give you some history right now. Yeah, we're going all the way back to 1500s, and we are going to the magnificent Michel de Montaigne, who is by many considered to be the first great essayist. Indeed, he sort of coins the word essay in a sense. He writes these this series of what he calls essays. He's French, hence the Michel de Montaigne. But the word essays, I think, is basically the word attempts. These are attempts to understand things. So obviously he's writing in the Renaissance era, and he's writing these attempts to understand. He's mostly kind of talking about knowledge, about thinking, about how we view the world. So these, and he's sort of got this huge collection. It's really worth reading. I will put up some Montaigne for your enjoyment. But I mean, this is quite an interesting way of thinking, because it's not the dedicated scientific enlightenment mode of understanding that we get. Certainly later on, enlightenment occurs kind of 1700s, so a good bit after Montaigne, and I suppose that kind of gives us our way in, sort of to think about the difference between Enlightenment and Renaissance thinking, which I'm aware some of you will have better grasp of these terms than others, and we can certainly discuss this when we meet if either of those are unclear to you. But if we think of Enlightenment as being kind of very scientific, you should just have had a session, I think, with Russell on the academic essay. Obviously, that's going to be incredibly useful to you guys. That's what you're going to be doing so much in university. But the academic essay is all about thoroughness. It's about understanding. It's about being very scientific. It's saying, where did you get this from? Why do you think this? What is your evidence? Who also has thought this? How do we connect these ideas? Very, very rigorous. Great. The personal essay is something different. It's not that thorough. It's not that scientific. It's much more reflective, digressive, taking things in a more kind of philosophical and sort of almost impressionistic kind of approach. So Montaigne, just to give you a few little bits on Montaigne. I'm going to give you a couple of quotes from the great man himself. Here we have: to compose our character is our duty, not to compose books, and to win not battles and provinces, but order and tranquility in our conduct. Our great and glorious masterpiece is to live appropriately. I mean, I think that's absolutely beautiful. And he's a remarkably modern writer. Like so many of these ideas, this idea of not gaining any sort of one magnificent achievement, but just learning how to live. That's a very modern idea. It's kind of almost connecting to our sort of mindfulness theory that we have today, but also a more kind of knowing yourself and the world and just understanding things and being content. And here we have fantastic. The doing, the writing itself. I think this is going to connect to a lot of us as writers. The writing itself is both a path to knowing and a path of knowing. As I write, I am forming my life. I think this is so wonderfully true. I mean, so much of when I'm trying to decide something or work something out, I usually sit down and write about it, and it's actually in writing that I kind of process my ideas. And obviously there is a distinction between the writing that we produce as a kind of process and the writing that we ultimately end up with and share with the world. I'm really aware I'm like banging my plant the whole time here, and she's just shivering behind me. She's my beautiful peace lily. I'm too animated. I'm hiding. I'm coming to you live from my bedroom today, because my husband is teaching in the living room. So I mean, I have to hide in the bedroom. So hence these highly peculiar little angles. It's not a big room. So yes, a path to knowing. Fantastic way of thinking about writing as a process and as a forms of understanding. And everybody loves Montaigne. Like he's amazing. He is someone. I mean, one of the writers of that time who is still so widely read. A lovely kind of quote here from T.S. Eliot. These are all kind of going to be on the slides, by the way, which I know I'm not showing you right now, but you can go and have a look at them on Moodle. And Eliot says, Montaigne does not reason. He insinuates, charms, and influences. If he reasons, you must be prepared for his having some other design on you than to convince you by his argument. I mean, that really nicely sets up this differentiation. You're not just trying to convince someone by argument, which so much of academic writing is. It's like, I have a theory and I need to explain to you this theory, and my task is to make it as comprehensible as possible so that you ultimately end up agreeing with me, or you're going to disagree with me and you're going to give me the evidence as to why you think I'm wrong. It's much more scientific and analytical. Personal essay, it's more reflective, it's influential, it's charming, it's fascinating. So we will set up in our class, we will set up the difference between the personal essay and any other kind of types of writing that you come up with, and I want you to think about different forms, different types of writing, where different forms of nonfiction that you might find online or in print, and we'll slightly define this genre in terms of difference of where the boundaries are. If we're thinking specifically with academic essay it's formal, it's serious, it's concerned with advancing a single argument within the context of an existing body of knowledge. You're saying, situating yourself. This is the world. This is the if you're writing an essay on, say, Charles Dickens, you're saying, okay, this is what other people have said about Dickens. This is, the literary field. This is a kind of Marxist study. You need to know about Marxism. This is where what I'm saying comes into all of that discourse. It's already happening. Personal essay is different. Personal essay is a little bit looser. It's not so defined. When you are writing a personal essay, students, academics, we are expected to research our subject. We're expected to reference our sources. We're supposed to know what other people think on the subject. We're supposed to advance an argument that contributes to new knowledge in the field. And we're supposed to use a certain form of terminology or jargon. We're supposed to conform to a certain structure, to a certain ways of referencing and so on, to kind of so that everybody is operating within the same field, so that we can interact with each other. The personal essay, it's informed, it's intelligent, it is concerned with exploring its subject, whatever that might be, in a potentially more digressive fashion. It's concerned with the self and the world. Yes, you do need to kind of acknowledge your sources, you do need to explain how what you're saying is linked to anything else, but we don't need formal referencing in an essay. You don't necessarily need to have a footnote or a brackets or a Harvard referencing or anything like that. But if you're saying, oh, I guess the essay is the kind of place where you can go, T.S. Eliot once said blah 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 blah, and then you're kind of putting that out there. Yes, by all means, give your page number, give your book, but that can kind of be the starting point. That doesn't mean this is an essay about T.S. Eliot. That is the point from which you jump in. You jump into your reflection, and I think this idea of it being personal is so important, because it is about you. And obviously, even in an academic essay, you're putting forward your own opinion, but you're putting forward your own opinion, your own theory, and showing how the world supports that. In the personal essay, you're talking much more about yourself and constructing things in the way that you see fit. I think something we will talk about, we'll probably talk a little bit about memoir and other stuff like that, and where that kind of differentiates, but I will save that for our discussion on Monday. What I want to set up just now, I've mentioned Montaigne. We're gonna look at some other writers. We're gonna look at Brodsky in some detail, but we will probably talk a little bit about George Orwell, who's a great essayist as well as a novelist. You're probably all aware of him as a novelist, but you might not have read his essays. So we'll talk a little bit about him and how he uses the personal essay. We will talk about Selina Godin, who is really fantastic current essayist, and indeed Rebecca Solnit, who I think you're probably going to hear a little bit more about on this course, certainly on the creative nonfiction course in second year. If you do that, you'll do some Solnit. So those are some. We'll look at some more of the history, kind of with people like Orwell, but we'll also come to where we are today. And actually, also we'll talk a little bit about Ali Smith, who, as I love, but she gets very creative with the essay, as you would imagine. She's not going to be nice and straightforward about it. But what I want to do is introduce this book to you, so that as you're reading it, you kind of have a guide. Okay, this is our little fella, Joseph Brodsky. Look at that little smiley face. Isn't he delightful? Brodsky is amazing. So okay, this is slightly coming into my background. A lot of my research is on Russian literature, because it's intense. It's crazy. Brodsky is someone who lives through a really horrific period of Russian history. He's born 1940 and he dies, I think, in the 1990s. I should have that date off the top of my head. But he grew up in Soviet Russia, when a time when things were not particularly pleasant. And he becomes part of what we call the Russian diaspora. So the people who have, the diaspora is kind of being the people who've grown up in one country and who have fled, and so you get these amazing cultures. So lots of the great Russian writers had to of that era had to flee Russia because they weren't able to write what they wanted to. So Brodsky kind of grows up very much in Lenin's Russia is never, and he's Jewish. There's a lot of anti-Semitism at the time, and he's very uncomfortable with kind of Soviet rule. His initial publications in then Leningrad were all secret. He couldn't publish through official publishers. He had to kind of just produce them himself and be very surreptitious about it. And he was actually tried for being a poet, because that's what Soviet Russia was like. They just went, no, you're not contributing to the state. You're not really writing the things that the government wants you to write. Why do you think you're a poet? And there's an accusation they leveled at him during the trial that he was I can't remember, something like I think the translation is something like a foolish poet in velveteen trousers, just with this idea of decadence and luxury and frivolousness. And he was sentenced to hard labor, essentially. Like, no, you're not being a proper person here. Stop being a poet. Get out. Go and work in the fields. And he did his time, and ultimately left as quickly as he could. And it was quite difficult for him to get out of Russia, well, the Soviet Union as it was then. But he did eventually, and settled in America, where he duly became one of the greatest poets of his age. He received the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was poet laureate of the U.S. for quite a long time. He's one of those people like Vladimir Nabokov, the author of Lolita, who was claimed by, so in a similar way, America. But indeed, lots of countries were taking on kind of people from Russia and saying, okay, you don't have your own home anymore. You can't go back there. So we will claim you as our own. And I'm sort of giving you all of this because I think it's really important to our understanding of this text. This is not a book about Russia, and it's not a book about America. It's about Venice. I don't know if anyone has been to Venice. I'm sure some of you will have been to Venice. It's an absolutely magical city. You must go at some point in your life. I've spent less than a week in Venice, and it's one of the most amazing weeks of my life. We don't know much about Brodsky in this text. I think that is really interesting. So I kind of mentioned, in some ways, personal essay is quite like memoir. But it's not memoir, because if this was memoir, you would need some information on who this person is who's talking to us. Like this kind of opening line: many years ago, the dollar was 870 lira and I was 32. And that's kind of it. How many moons ago? When? What's the year? Who is I? We don't get the answers to these questions. What we get is atmosphere. And I think this is glorious. And what I want you to do is read this work and note down what you learn. Like, what does he actually tell you? What are the questions that are never answered? I was standing there, so this is just carrying on this first paragraph. I was standing there waiting for the only person I knew in the city to meet me. She was quite late. Who is she? We're not going to know. What we have is a stranger coming to a place. In what ways is this memoir? In what ways is it travel literature? I mean, that's another kind of thing. And a lot of personal essays do, to some extent, engage with travel. And I think that's not because it tells us about the places that we go to, but it tells us about ourselves. I think when we travel, we understand ourselves through difference. And so when we arrive in a place, so this is a stranger arriving in Venice, he's kind of immediately set aside from the place. He's not at home. He's reevaluating everything. And the way that he processes everything in some ways tells us more about himself and about the human condition. What I think we do get in this novel, and why I've kind of given you the background information about Brodsky, is a sort of rootlessness and a melancholy that runs through all of this. He never kind of says, this is who I am, this is where I've come from, this is why I've left Russia, none of this. But we get little hints, a little way through the second kind of part chapter. He has these kind of distinctions. I'm not quite sure how clear they are, but in my copy here we have this, and then we have these sort of big titles at the beginning, big letters at the beginning of each section. In the second section, he mentions a Russian word. He's talking about seaweed, and it's vodorosly, which is a fantastic word. And just saying, we get these tiny hints of who this person is. We never get the full picture, but what we do get is a disconnection from the city. And I guess I want to kind of say to you, well, I don't want to tell you too much about this because I want to know your impressions. Venice is an unusual city because it has got water everywhere, the street, half the streets are canals. You know, we don't have roads, we have rivers, canals. Um, and so I'm not going to say too much about the analysis because I'd really want to hear what your impressions are of this text, and when we meet, I shall go through all my theories. I got a lot of them. I've written a few papers on this because it is glorious. Yes, you only have the beginning. I suspect you might want to read more. It's beautiful. You can get it. There are versions online. There's this beautiful little penguin book. Read it, love it, enjoy it. Take your time with this. Don't kind of be reading it with quick academic hat. I've got my lecture in half an hour. It's a glorious, slow kind of piece. And I think in a way it's quite different from a lot of personal essays. A lot of personal essays have some kind of political angle, particularly if we're looking at somebody like Orwell or indeed Godin. But also sometimes they are trying to capture a moment or a feeling, and I think it's a feeling that we really get in this text. So that's all I want to say for just now. Go ahead, read, enjoy. I will see you guys on Monday. Take care, people.